The camera is already in the room, not a visible one, not bolted to a ceiling or perched on a lamppost. The kind that lives in your pocket, the kind that knows where you went for lunch, who you called, what you bought, what you read. On June 28, 2017, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress voted to pass the National Intelligence Law. Article 7 was simple, 14 words in English translation. Any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work. No exceptions, no refusal clause, no debate. The law didn't create surveillance in China. It made refusal illegal. For years, China had been building what foreign analysts called the largest surveillance apparatus in human history. Facial recognition systems, social credit scores, internet censorship infrastructure. But these tools existed in a legal gray zone. They were justified case by case, agency by agency, city by city. There was no unified legal framework that said, this is what the state can demand, and you have no right to say no. The National Intelligence Law changed that. It didn't announce itself with fanfare. There were no public hearings. The law passed during a routine legislative session. State media mentioned it briefly. Most citizens never read the full text. But every company operating in China understood what it meant. If the state asks for your data, you hand it over. If the state asks you to install monitoring software, you comply. If the state asks you to build a backdoor into your encryption, you build it. And if you're a foreign company doing business in China, the same rules apply. The law's language was deliberately vague. It didn't define intelligence work. It didn't specify what kind of data could be requested or under what circumstances. It simply asserted the state's right to demand cooperation. Legal scholars in Beijing noted the ambiguity. Some quietly called it a blank check. But ambiguity wasn't a flaw. It was the point. When a law is vague, compliance becomes a guessing game. And in that game, caution always wins. Tech companies didn't wait for the government to come knocking. They preemptively expanded data retention. They hired compliance officers. They built systems that assumed total transparency with the state. Because the cost of refusal wasn't a fine or a lawsuit. It was losing your business license. It was having your executives detained. It was disappearing from the Chinese market overnight. The law relied on a principle older than the surveillance cameras themselves, self-enforcement through fear. To understand why this law passed without resistance, you have to understand what China looked like in 2017. The economy was slowing. The government was tightening control over civil society. President Xi Jinping had consolidated more personal power than any leader since Mao. Corruption purges had removed thousands of officials. Dissent, even mild dissent, was being punished more harshly than it had been in decades. And there had been attacks. In 2013, a vehicle plowed into Tiananmen Square, killing 5 people. The government called it terrorism. In 2014, a knife attack at a train station in Kunming left 31 dead. State media framed these incidents as existential threats. The message was clear. Stability is fragile. The state must act. National security became the justification for nearly everything. The National Intelligence Law was part of a broader legal architecture. It followed the cybersecurity law in 2016, which required data localization and real name registration online. It preceded the data security law in 2021, which formalized state control over how information flows across borders. Together, these laws didn't just regulate technology, they redefined what privacy meant. In the West, privacy is often framed as an individual right. In China's legal framework, privacy is conditional. It exists only when it doesn't conflict with state interests. And the state decides when that conflict exists. Article 7 of the National Intelligence Law made that explicit. But the law didn't just target individuals, It targeted the infrastructure of daily life, payment apps, ride-hailing platforms, social media networks, e-commerce sites. Every digital interaction generates data, and under the new law, that data belonged, in effect, to the state. Take WeChat. Over 1 billion users. It's how people in China communicate, pay bills, book appointments, apply for jobs. Tencent, the company that owns WeChat, is private. But after 2017, Tencent's servers became an extension of state intelligence capacity. If authorities wanted to know who you talked to, what you said, where you were when you said it, they could ask. And Tencent had no legal grounds to refuse. The same logic applied to Alibaba, Baidu, Didi, ByteDance. These companies didn't become state-owned. They became state-accessible. And because the law applied to any organization, it wasn't limited to tech giants, universities, hospitals, banks, hotels. Any entity that collected data could be compelled to share it. The law transformed ordinary institutions into nodes in a surveillance network. Most people didn't notice the shift. Their apps still worked. Their lives continued. But the terms had changed. The law also had an external dimension. Chinese companies operating abroad were still subject to Chinese law. If a Chinese telecom company built infrastructure in Europe or Africa, Beijing could, in theory, demand access to the data flowing through it. If a Chinese-owned app had users in the United States, Chinese intelligence agencies could demand cooperation. This created a dilemma for foreign governments. Could they trust Chinese technology? Could they allow Chinese companies to operate critical infrastructure? The law didn't prove that Beijing was spying, but it removed any legal barrier that would stop them. Australia banned Huawei from its 5G network. The United States pressured allies to do the same. The European Union debated restrictions. The national intelligence law became a geopolitical tool, not because of what it did, but because of what it could do. And Beijing didn't back down. Officials insisted the law was defensive. They pointed to similar laws in other countries. They argued that national security required cooperation from the private sector. All of that was true. But other countries didn't have China's surveillance infrastructure. Other countries didn't have facial recognition databases covering hundreds of millions of people. Other countries didn't have social credit systems that track behavior across every platform. The law didn't create those systems. It made them inescapable. In Xinjiang, the western region where over 1 million Uyghurs were detained in what the government called re-education camps, surveillance became suffocating. Checkpoints scanned faces. Police collected DNA samples. Apps monitored movement. The national intelligence law provided legal cover for all of it. Officials could argue, we're not violating rights, we're enforcing the law. To party officials, this looked like order. To the people being watched, it felt like the walls were moving closer. But Xinjiang was treated as an exception, a special case. High-risk region, extraordinary measures. What wasn't said publicly was that the tools tested in Xinjiang were being exported to the rest of the country. Facial recognition systems, predictive policing algorithms, mass data aggregation. These technologies didn't stay in the borderlands. They spread east. By 2020, over 200 million surveillance cameras were operational across China. The government announced plans to add hundreds of millions more. AI companies competed to build better facial recognition, better behavior prediction, better tracking. And the national intelligence law ensured that all of that data could be accessed, aggregated, and analyzed by the state. The law made surveillance efficient, and efficiency in governance often means the elimination of alternatives. Once a system is built, dismantling it becomes unthinkable. The infrastructure is too expensive, the bureaucracy too entrenched, the political cost too high. That's the invisible consequence, not dramatic repression, Not sudden crackdowns, just the slow normalization of a system where privacy is a privilege the state grants, not a right you possess. The National Intelligence Law passed because no one inside China had the power to stop it. The Standing Committee votes on laws, but the outcomes are predetermined. Party leadership decides policy. The legislature ratifies it. There is no opposition party, no independent judiciary, no free press to investigate and challenge. The law passed because the system was designed to pass laws like this. And once it passed, reversal became impossible. Repealing it would signal weakness. It would suggest the state overreached. It would embolden critics, so the law stayed. And the surveillance expanded. Today, a teenager in Shanghai can't take the subway without her face being scanned. A journalist in Beijing can't search sensitive terms without triggering alerts. A Uyghur in Urumqi can't leave his neighborhood without passing through a checkpoint that logs his biometrics. None of this required violence. It required a legal framework that made refusal impossible. Article 7 didn't force people to accept surveillance. It made non-acceptance illegal. Other countries watched, some with alarm, some with interest. Surveillance technology is borderless. The tools China built, facial recognition, predictive policing, mass data analysis, are for sale. Democracies buy them. Authoritarian regimes buy them. The difference isn't the technology, it's the legal framework that governs it. China proved that you don't need a dictatorship to build a surveillance state. You just need a law that makes cooperation mandatory. You need a public that's too afraid, too busy, or too accustomed to resist. You need a system where the cost of saying no is higher than the cost of compliance. The National Intelligence Law turns surveillance into infrastructure, and infrastructure, once built, becomes invisible. You stop noticing it, you stop questioning it. It just is. That's how systems persist, not through force, through normalization, and 14 words were enough.